When I stepped off the plane, I half expected someone to be waiting. Maybe with a small sign. Maybe just a warm hug. But the arrival gate was empty. No familiar face, no teary reunion. Just the sour smell of recycled air and a wave of jet lag, hanging off my shoulders. I hauled my bag off the carousel and wheeled it toward the car park. The taxi driver barely glanced at me when I climbed in, but he asked where I was coming from. I told him Africa, and he nodded like that explained everything. It didn't. 2 years. 2 years in a country I hadn't chosen, doing work I hadn't planned for, in a village that was never mine. They called it volunteer work, but really, it was exile with a halo. My parents had framed it as a life-changing opportunity, said it would be good for me, said I needed perspective. I had perspective now. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Less like home, more like a memory I'd outgrown. The garden was overgrown, the paint on the shutters slightly chipped. I stood at the front door for a moment, key in hand, trying to steady myself. Maybe they were inside, planning a surprise. Maybe the silence meant something good. The key still fit. The door creaked open, and silence swallowed me. No one. I wheeled my bag through the hallway, past the kitchen, empty, and up the stairs. My chest tightened as I reached the landing. Maybe they were out. Maybe there was a note. Something. But when I opened what used to be my bedroom door, the air punched right out of me. Gone. The walls were white and sterile. The posters I'd once carefully taped up, ripped down, my bookshelf, my desk, my bed, all replaced by a treadmill, some weights, and a dusty yoga mat rolled up in the corner. There was a new, sour smell in the air, like rubber and sweat and effort. It was a gym now. My room had been turned into a bloody gym. I stood in the doorway, blinking back something sharp behind my eyes. I didn't even know where to put my bag. I stepped inside anyway, like some intruder in my own life. The floor creaked under my boots. The closet was empty, the drawers bare. It was like I'd never lived here. And then I saw it. A strip of carpet in the corner, unevenly tucked. A small ripple in the smoothness. My heart started pounding, not with fear, but with instinct. I dropped to my knees, pulled it back, and there it was. A letter. Folded and yellowed, with my name written in faded ink. Next to it, a packet of papers. My hands trembled as I reached for them, already knowing, deep down, that whatever they weren't meant for me. And whatever life I thought I had, it just ended. I didn't open the letter straight away. For a long moment, I just sat there, cross-legged on the floor of the room that used to be mine, the papers burning against my palm. The air felt heavier somehow, like the house had been holding its breath, waiting for me to find this. My name, Emma, was written on the envelope in my mother's handwriting, loopy and careful, like she'd practiced it a dozen times before finally committing to paper. That was the first twist of the knife. She'd meant for me to find it. Maybe not like this, maybe not now, but still. I unfolded the letter. Emma, if you're reading this, it means you've come home. I don't know when or in what state, but you've come back. There are things we should have told you earlier. Truths that got buried in fear, in shame, in timing that never felt right. We adopted you when you were just a few days old. It was private, closed, and quiet. We wanted a family, and we wanted you. But as the years passed, things changed. Your father and I can't explain it all here, but you deserve to know, even if it's late. I'm sorry. Mum. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands shook by the end of it, but it wasn't the contents of the letter that broke me. It was how short it was, how small the explanation felt next to the enormity of the truth. I was adopted. Not just that, they'd hidden it, lied, built a whole life around pretending I belonged, when apparently, at some point, I didn't fit the mold anymore. And then they'd shipped me off like a piece of unwanted furniture they didn't have space for. I unfolded the rest of the documents. Adoption papers. Legal, cold, full of signatures and dates and official stamps. There was a name there I'd never seen before. My birth mother's, I assumed. My real mother. Her name was Melissa. That word, real, sat uncomfortably in my mouth, even in silence. 2 years in Africa. That wasn't a mission. That was a convenient way to get rid of a problem. Me. The tears came finally, but not the kind that curled up in pain. These were hot, fast, angry. Years of questions without answers. Birthday cards that felt distant. A father who grew colder as I got older. A mother who hugged me like she was afraid to break something already broken. They erased me. And I'd come back thinking maybe, just maybe, there'd be some space left for me. A corner of the house. A corner of their hearts. But no, they made it clear. I was never meant to come back. And now that I had, I wasn't leaving quietly. I left the documents on the floor, half spread like a crime scene. The letter, the papers, the truth. Let them sit there. Maybe someone else in this house would trip over them the way I had. Downstairs it was quiet, the kind of silence that felt deliberate. I padded into the hallway, heart thumping against my ribs, eyes scanning every photo on. The wall, it was something I hadn't done in years. I used to smile at these pictures, back when I thought they meant something. Now they looked like strangers caught in someone else's story. There were photos of my parents at the beach, beaming in the sun. A few of them with Maya, my younger cousin, or so I'd always believed, who seemed to be in more frames than I ever was. And then there was one, hanging just outside the living room, that stopped me cold. A framed photo from Christmas, maybe a year ago. My parents holding matching mugs, Maya between them in a hideous but festive jumper. The caption below, "Home for the holidays." I wasn't in it. Of course I wasn't. I wasn't home. A laugh escaped me, sharp and bitter. That was the first time I realized it wasn't just that they'd moved on. They'd built something new, in my absence. Something shiny and presentable. A version of the family they always wanted but didn't quite get with me. I stepped into the living room, half expecting someone to be there. But it was just me, and the new furniture, and the treadmill humming quietly in what used to be my room upstairs. I sat on the sofa, stiff with silence, and tried to remember the last time I felt like I belonged here. Maybe when I was 14, when Mom still tucked me in if I had a nightmare, or 13, when Dad took me to the science museum and actually listened to me talk. It had all begun to crack after that. And when they sent me away, when they volunteered me for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, they called it generous, noble, a chance to help others and discover myself. But it wasn't about me at all. It was about clearing out the mess, making room for something easier. I wasn't the daughter they wanted. They didn't say it out loud, but they didn't have to. The gym upstairs, the photos, the silence when I walked through the door. They said enough. I picked up my phone and opened the voice memos app. I didn't know why, but I hit record. "My name is Emma," I said, slowly, clearly. "I'm not who they wanted me to be, but I'm still here, and I'm going to make sure they never forget that." I stared at the red blinking light for a second, then saved the file. This wasn't going to be a reunion. It was going to be a reckoning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the floor of my old bedroom, well, what was left of it, curled up in the corner beside the abandoned exercise bike, with a hoodie for a pillow and rage for a blanket. My suitcase sat by the door, still, zipped, still packed. I wasn't ready to unpack. Not yet. Not until I knew what came next. At 4 a.m., I opened the letter again. The handwriting was familiar. Mum's. Neat, like always. But there was a rush to the way she wrote this one, like she'd been scared someone might catch her mid-truth. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means we didn't do what we planned. Maybe we changed our minds. Maybe not. Either way, I owe you the truth. We adopted you when you were 5. You were supposed to be temporary, a foster. But we fell in love with you, or we thought we did. I thought I did. But things changed. You changed, and we didn't know how to keep up with you. Africa was supposed to be good for you, for us, but we didn't think you'd come back. I stopped reading. I didn't want to know what else she had written, because it didn't matter. They didn't think I'd come back. The house was quiet when I finally stood up. The morning sun was just starting to spill through the window, cutting long lines of light across the walls. The light didn't make it warmer, it just made everything sharper, clearer. I walked to the mirror, the only thing left in the room, that hadn't been replaced or repurposed. I looked older, not in the tired, worn-down kind of way. Older in the sense that I'd survived something. I looked like someone who had nothing left to lose. Downstairs, the kitchen was spotless. I made coffee out of habit, and when the machine beeped, I half expected someone, Mom or Dad, to walk in, ask how I slept, pretend everything was fine. No one did. They weren't home. I didn't know where they were. I didn't care. I sat down with the mug and opened my notes app, started typing. Step 1, take back the story. Step 2, let them watch you rebuild what they tried to erase. Step 3, make them see it, feel it, regret it. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but I didn't need all the answers. Not today. I just needed to keep moving, to take control of the pieces they'd left behind. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want understanding. I wanted the truth to burn brighter than their version of events, and I wanted to be the one holding the match. I didn't know where to start. So, I started with the people who might have known the truth all along. Miteses. Carter lived 2 houses down. She used to bring lemon bars over when I was little and told everyone she'd known my mom since school. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything and pretended not to. Her front garden still looked like it belonged in a gardening magazine. Perfect hedges, no weeds, not a single petal out of place. I knocked on her door before I could. Second-guessed myself. She opened it like she'd been expecting me. "Emma," she said, blinking slowly, "back from your grand tour?" Something like that. She stepped aside without asking questions. Same floral perfume. Same tightly pulled back gray hair. I sat on the same armchair I always did as a kid. Only now I felt like I took up more space. Like I no longer belonged in the corners of other people's stories. She poured tea. No sugar. Just how I hated it. "I found a letter," I said, skipping the small talk, "and adoption papers." She didn't flinch, just stirred her tea like I'd told her it might rain later. "I see," she said, eyes not meeting mine. "So you know." "How long?" She exhaled through her nose. "Since before you arrived. I helped your parents with the paperwork. They were uncertain about it. But your mother wanted to try. She always wanted to be someone who gave back." It sounded rehearsed, like something she'd said before, maybe even to herself. "And when they sent me away? That wasn't part of the plan. But they considered giving me up. Again." Her hands tightened around her teacup. "People make decisions in fear, Emma. It doesn't always make them cruel." "No," I said, "but it makes them weak." She didn't argue. I left before the tea went cold. I knew what I needed now, not just memories or suspicions. I needed facts, paper trails, dates, decisions made behind closed doors. If they thought they could erase me quietly, I would bring the noise. The next stop was the social worker's office. Well, the agency that had handled my case. I Googled it on the walk back, and to my surprise, it still existed. I booked a nie-eindiges appointment, said I needed my records. I didn't say why. By the time I got home, Mum's car was in the driveway. My heart kicked against my ribs. I opened the door slowly. She was in the kitchen, unloading groceries. Just like nothing had happened. Just like the world hadn't cracked open under my feet. She looked up. "Oh, you're still here." Still here. Not, "You're back." Not, "We missed you." Still, I smiled, sharp as glass. "Yeah," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere. Not until I turned every quiet betrayal into something loud enough they'd never forget." Dinner was awkward. She'd made spaghetti like it was some kind of peace offering, like carbs could fill the space where trust used to live. I sat across from her, twirling my fork, not eating much. My dad still hadn't come home, which I was oddly grateful for. One parent at a time was plenty. She didn't ask about Africa. She didn't ask about the letter. She didn't ask why I hadn't unpacked. Instead, she asked, "Do you still like mushrooms?" I never liked mushrooms. She blinked. "Are you sure?" I wanted to laugh, or scream. I wasn't sure which would come first. "You're confusing me with the daughter you wanted," I said flatly. Her fork clattered against the plate. "Emma, that's not fair." "No, what's not fair is spending 2 years in a village, with no running water, while you turned my life into a home gym and tried to forget I existed." She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Her hands were shaking. "Good. I found the papers," I added. "The ones you shoved under the carpet like I was an inconvenient mess you didn't want to deal with." "That's not how it was." "Then tell me how it was." Silence. "You were difficult," she finally said. "You always had questions. You never just settled. You were too big for this family, too loud, too angry. So your solution was to send me away and hope the world would beat it out of me?" She didn't answer. I pushed my plate away and stood up. "I'll be in my room." "You don't have a room." It came out before she could stop it. I froze. "Right, because this isn't my home." "Emma, wait, please. Just, we're trying to help." "Help who? Me or yourselves?" She didn't follow me upstairs. I lay on the couch, because yes, my bed was gone too, and stared at the ceiling. I couldn't tell if I felt more sad or more disgusted. They'd adopted me, claimed me, but never chose me. Not really. I thought of the village in Africa, the way people there had nothing, but still looked each other in the eyes, still saw each other. I missed that. I missed being seen. I texted the agency again, told them I needed the full file. Everything they had. I didn't care how long it would take. Then I opened my laptop. Not to scroll mindlessly. Not to escape. I opened a blank document and wrote at the top, "The girl they almost forgot." If they wanted to erase me, I'd write myself back in. Not as the girl who begged to be loved, but the woman who'd returned to burn it all down. The next few days felt like a slow-burning fire. Every small interaction a log thrown onto the growing pile of resentment I had for them. I didn't bother with breakfast. Didn't ask if they needed anything. I stayed in my room, my eyes glued to the screen, piecing together fragments of a past I didn't know was mine. The adoption papers were still in my bag, tucked in the corner, waiting to be read fully. It felt wrong to dive into them, like I was digging up something I couldn't bury again. But I had no choice. That afternoon, I took the papers to the park under the guise of taking a walk. But really, I just needed to breathe. The air in the house was too thick, too stifling. I sat on a bench, the sound of children playing in the background. But I was distant. I needed distance from everything. From her, from him, from this house. I opened the envelope and spread the papers out before me. The signature at the bottom was familiar. My mother's handwriting. But it wasn't her name. It was a stranger's name. That name had no weight to it. It didn't even sound like a real person. I ran my fingers across the page, tracing every word as if it could make sense of it. The papers weren't about my adoption. Not really. They were about how they had planned to let me go. They had given up on me. They had planned my exit before I had a say in it. They didn't want me. They didn't want to make it work. I had been an experiment they decided wasn't worth the effort. That's when I saw the final page, the one with the court's official seal. It was an email printout, though, not a document. The subject line was simple: Family Placement Update. I leaned in closer, and there it was: Termination of Parental Rights. Emma Fisher. Termination. My heart stopped. They'd been ready to give me up for good. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers into the wind and watch them scatter like I'd been scattered. But instead, I folded them carefully and shoved them back into my bag. A plan was forming. A heavy, bitter plan. My return wasn't about forgiveness. It was never about making amends. I wasn't here to rebuild what was broken. I was here to finish what they'd started. They had erased me once. But now I would carve my name into every corner of their life and make them remember who they almost lost. Make them feel what it was like to lose me for good. And I would make sure they regretted it every single day. By the time I returned home, the house felt like a shell. Cold. Impersonal. They were pretending things were normal, acting as though nothing had changed. But I knew. I felt the shift between us. Whether they saw it or not, I was no longer the same girl they'd sent away. I walked in, shutting the door behind me with a quiet finality. The sounds of the house, a creaky floorboard, the hum of the fridge, had a new, unnerving tone. This wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I found my parents in the kitchen, as usual. Mom was at the counter, chopping vegetables for dinner. She smiled at me. That same smile she'd always had. The one she used when she tried to pretend everything was fine. But I could see it now. The way her eyes lingered on me for just a moment too long. A flicker of uncertainty beneath her calm exterior. Dad was leaning against the counter, his arms folded, looking at me in a way that was harder to read, like he was trying to place the person standing in front of him. "How was your day?" Mom asked casually, as if nothing had changed. She was trying to fill the air with something, anything, to make the tension dissipate, but it was like trying to plug a leak with a bandage. "It was fine," I said, my voice steady. I had been practicing this for days. I had rehearsed it 100 times in my mind, but now that I was standing here, the weight of it all hit harder than I expected. The lies, the secrets, the erased years. "You've been out for a while now," Dad said, his tone a little too soft. He cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. "Everything's okay?" I nodded, taking a step toward the kitchen table. "I'm fine," I replied, then added, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "I just found out a few things." My parents froze. They didn't look at each other, but I could see it in the stiffening of their shoulders, the unspoken acknowledgement that something was about to break. Mom placed the knife down slowly, the clink of it against the cutting board louder than it should have been. "What do you mean, Emma?" Her voice was tight, the first crack in her facade. I walked to the table, sitting down across from them. There was a strange calmness to it now, an eerie stillness that felt like I was entering a different world. The same house, but the people in it were strangers. "I found something," I said, taking the envelope from my bag and laying it flat on the table. Their eyes immediately went to it. They knew what it was. Dad's jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw the flicker of guilt behind his eyes. It was brief, but it was there. "Emma," Mom's voice was thin, almost pleading. "Please, let's just talk about this." "I'm done talking," I said, cutting her off. My tone was colder than I meant it to be. I wasn't sure anymore if I even cared about the conversation. "I don't need to talk. I just need you to hear me. I know what you were planning. I know what you wanted to do." There was no more pretending now. No more dancing around it. The truth was out in the open, and I wasn't backing down. "I wasn't a choice for you," I said quietly, the bitterness still hanging in the air. "You had plans to erase me." Mom looked away. She was struggling to maintain control, but the cracks were wide now. Dad, though, stood still. He looked at me, really looked at me, as though for the first time in a long while, and his expression was unreadable. "You were never supposed to find out," he said softly. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession. "Why?" I asked. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "We didn't want to hurt you," Mom whispered, but the words felt hollow, like she was trying to justify the injustice. I shook my head, feeling the weight of the years between us. "You already did." And in that moment, everything shifted. They had underestimated me, and I was done letting them believe they still held the power. I wasn't the girl they'd sent away anymore, and I wasn't going to let them pretend that what they did didn't matter. I sat there in silence, letting the weight of their words hang in the air. The room felt stifling, too small for all the years of resentment, of unspoken truth, now laid bare between us. I could see their discomfort, their desire to fix this, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. Not now. Not after everything they had done. Dad shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly struggling to find the right words. But I didn't want words. Not anymore. I wanted action. I wanted them to face the truth they'd been so careful to bury. "You thought you could just replace me, didn't you?" I asked, my voice low but piercing. "You thought you could erase me and it would all just go away." Mom flinched. She looked at Dad for support, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, studying me with a strange intensity that felt more like a stranger's gaze than a father's. "We didn't replace you, Emma," Dad said finally, his voice hesitant. You just what?" I interrupted. "Kept me around until it was convenient? Until you could find a way to get rid of me without making it look too obvious?" Mom opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't defend herself this time, not when the truth was staring us all in the face. The truth about what they had planned, about the plans they had made when I was still overseas, the plans to quietly erase my existence from their lives. "I was never part of the family, was I?" I said, my eyes burning with the intensity of the emotion I had held back for years. "Not really. Not the way you wanted me to be. You didn't see me as your daughter. You just saw me as a burden. A mistake." "No, Emma," Mom began, her voice thick with emotion, but I wasn't listening anymore. "I wasn't a burden," I said, my voice rising now. "I wasn't a mistake. I was yours, and you threw me away like I didn't matter. And now you want to pretend everything's fine? Now you want me to just fall in line and act like nothing happened?" The words felt heavy as I said them, but they were nothing compared to the weight I had been carrying for years. The weight of the silence, of the lies, of the feeling that I didn't belong here, that I was always going to be an outsider in my own family. "Emma, we never meant for you to feel like this," Mom said, stepping forward, her eyes filled with tears. "You have to believe us. We love you." "Love me?" I shot back, standing up now, my heart pounding. "You love me so much that you kept me in the dark about my own life? You love me so much that you were ready to give me up when it was more convenient for you?" Dad's face twisted with guilt. I could see it now, clearer than ever. The man I had looked up to for years was just as flawed as the rest of us. But this wasn't about him. This was about me, about everything they had taken from me and tried to hide. "I didn't come back to fix this," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "I came back to make you regret everything. I came back to make you see what you almost lost." The silence stretched out between us, thick with the truth we had avoided for so long. I didn't know what they expected me to do next. Maybe they thought I would forgive them. Maybe they thought they could make it all right again with a few words. But I had already moved beyond that. "I'm not your daughter anymore," I said, my voice cold, final. "Not the way you wanted me to be. And you're not my family, not the way I thought you were." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the kitchen, speechless. I didn't need to hear their apologies. I didn't need them to beg for my forgiveness. I had already made my decision. They had erased me once. Now it was time for me to erase them from my life. I didn't expect them to chase me. I didn't expect them to come running, pleading for a second chance. They hadn't when I was a child, when I needed them most. Why would they now, after everything they'd done? But as I walked out into the cold evening, the door closing softly, behind me, I felt the weight of something else, a finality I hadn't anticipated. There was no going back. Not now. Not after all that had happened. I stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at the familiar house, now foreign to me. The house that had once been a home, now a symbol of everything I had lost. The windows were dark, the lights off, as if they too were waiting for something. For me to return, for me to come crawling back and beg them to love me again. No, I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fall into their trap of guilt and shame. The truth was out now, and nothing would ever be the same. I turned away from the house, the sound of my footsteps loud in the empty street. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't need to. I had nowhere to be but away from here, away from them. The first few days were a blur. Long walks through the city, trying to make sense of my thoughts, of what had just transpired. I stayed in cheap motels, eating alone in diners, the same sense of isolation settling over me. The freedom I had longed for felt empty, hollow, in the quiet moments when I could hear my own breath, the silence pressing in on me. But then I started to feel something else, something I hadn't expected. Empowerment. It was strange at first. Like I was reclaiming pieces of myself I'd forgotten were missing. A sense of strength, of independence that had always been buried under years of neglect. I'd spent so much of my life trying to fit into their version of me, trying to be the daughter they wanted, the person they could love without question. But now I was free to be whoever I needed to be, whoever I wanted to be. I found myself spending more time with people who actually saw me, not just as their daughter, not just as an obligation, but as a person in my own right. I started doing the things I had put off for years, like art, like writing. I signed up for a photography class, something I had always wanted to try but had never had the chance to pursue. It felt good. It felt right. But there was still something gnawing at me, a part of me that wasn't quite healed, a part of me that was still angry, still devastated. I had to face it eventually. I wasn't done with them, not yet. I wasn't done with the family who had erased me, who had pushed me aside for convenience. They had forgotten me, but I hadn't forgotten them. I wouldn't forget what they had done. So I did what I had always done best. I took control. I started looking into what had really happened. The adoption papers were just the beginning. I wanted to know everything, every detail, every decision they had made behind my back. I wanted to understand their motivations, their excuses. I wanted to know how they could live with themselves. And then I would make them face it, face everything they had done, face the daughter they had erased. But I wouldn't be the same girl who had left that house 2 years ago, the girl who had wanted their love. No, I was stronger now, more resolute. I was going to make them regret what they had done. And this time, it wouldn't be me doing the begging. I didn't go straight back. I wasn't foolish enough to think that a confrontation now would bring any clarity or peace. The truth was, I needed time to understand exactly what I was walking into, and how to make them understand the weight of what they'd done. The more I dug, the more I found. The adoption papers, the legal documents hidden under the floorboard, in my old room, were only the tip of the iceberg. I had expected the betrayal to be cruel, but this was worse than I could have imagined. My parents had been planning this for years, not just the adoption, but the replacement. They'd already chosen a family, another version of me, someone younger, more obedient, more easily molded into their ideal daughter. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn their world to the ground, but I didn't. Not yet. I had to wait for the right moment. I spent the next few days sifting through every bit of information I could find. I dug through old photos and letters, piecing together the story of my absence. I dug through their friends' social media posts looking for clues, and slowly a pattern emerged. They had quietly erased me from their lives, almost as if I had never existed. What made it worse was the silence. They hadn't even tried to contact me after I left. Not once. It was as though I had been nothing more than a passing inconvenience, and that hurt more than I cared to admit. I had expected anger. I had expected them to try and fix things, to beg for forgiveness, maybe even cry at my feet. But no, instead they had replaced me without a second thought. I couldn't decide if I was angry or devastated. Both, maybe. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding on to, how much of me was still tethered to that family, to that past. And now, that tether had snapped. But something else was growing inside me, something that had been buried under years of guilt and self-doubt. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that I wasn't just angry at them. I was angry at myself, angry that I had let them control my life for so long, angry that I had believed I wasn't worthy of being loved by them. I had spent so much time looking for their approval that I had forgotten to ask the most important question. Why was I seeking it in the first place? I wanted to fix the hole they had left in me, but that wasn't the answer. The answer wasn't to force myself back into their lives, to make them love me again. The answer was to take back the power I had given away. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor, and now I had a plan. The next time I went home, I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't wait for their approval. I would make them regret every moment they spent erasing me from their lives. I wasn't just returning to confront them. I was returning to take back what was mine. And this time, I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't let myself go home immediately. I couldn't. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I had to prepare. I had to stand strong, not just for me, but for the girl I once was, the one they had abandoned. She needed to be seen again. The more I thought about it, the more I realized. This wasn't just about me confronting them. This was about me confronting myself, the version of me that had been so eager to please, so desperate to fit into their world. So, I waited. It wasn't until a week later that I finally packed my things and made the long drive back. My heart pounded as the familiar street came into view, and I could feel my breath catch in my chest. For a moment, I almost turned the car around, but I didn't. I wasn't the same person who had left. I wasn't that girl, broken and desperate for love. I was someone else now, someone who had learned to live without them. I parked in front of the house, a house that once felt like home, and stared at the facade. It hadn't changed much, but I had. It was the same house that had sheltered me for 18 years. But I knew now that it wasn't my home anymore. Home wasn't something that could be taken, stripped away, or replaced. Home was something you built for yourself. And this was where they had erased me. I grabbed my suitcase from the back seat and walked up the front steps, feeling the weight of everything I had come back for. My hand paused on the doorknob. For a brief moment, I thought about what it would be like to just walk in and act like nothing had happened, like nothing had changed. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to let them pretend they hadn't torn me down. I pushed. The door open, stepping into the house with the steady certainty that I wasn't just visiting. I was here to stay. The hallway smelled faintly of incense, a new addition I didn't remember from before. My eyes immediately flicked to the family portraits on the wall, the ones that had once showcased moments of joy and togetherness. Now, they looked like relics of a life I wasn't a part of anymore, a life I had been forgotten from. I took a deep breath and walked further into the house, my footsteps echoing. I could hear their voices from the kitchen, faint, almost too casual, as if nothing had ever happened, as if they hadn't erased me from every single part of their lives. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I felt something else, something deeper. I felt the overwhelming weight of the silence between us, the gulf they had created. And it was that silence that had allowed them to pretend they were in control. But now, I was back, and the silence was about to speak louder than they ever could. I knocked lightly on the kitchen door, the sound of it striking my parents like a warning bell. It was time for them to face what they had done. This was the beginning of the end for everything they thought they could hide. Emma? My father's voice was hesitant, as if he was unsure whether he was speaking to the same girl who had left 2 years ago, or the stranger standing in front of him now. I looked at him, my eyes steady, unwavering. There was no more sweetness in my gaze, no longing for approval, no trace of the girl who had craved his affection. I was an adult now, one who could see through the carefully constructed walls they'd built around their lies. You've been busy, I see. I gestured towards the fitness equipment that now filled what used to be my room. The treadmill, the weights, the mirrored wall. It was also meticulously planned. An image of a perfect, well-adjusted family. An image that didn't include me. His face flushed with guilt, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. It's a change, Emma. A healthy change. You wouldn't understand. Wouldn't I? My voice cut through the room like a blade. I understand more than you think. I took a step forward, watching as my mother, who had been sitting quietly at the table, looked up nervously. Emma, please, she began, her voice thin, like a leaf caught in the wind. You're home now. We can talk about this later. I could see her trying to protect him, trying to keep things calm. But I wasn't interested in calm anymore. Not after everything. Not after they had turned me into nothing. I walked past her, ignoring the way she flinched, and went straight to the pile of documents that I'd left on the kitchen table the moment I arrived. The adoption papers, the ones they had tried to hide. Do you think I wouldn't find out? I asked, my tone quiet but heavy. I dropped the papers in front of them with a sharp slap. Do you think I didn't deserve to know? Or did you think I was just going to disappear forever, like the girl you erased from your life? My father's hands trembled as he picked up the papers, his eyes scanning them briefly before he looked back at me. Emma, this isn't what you think. We had to do it. We thought it was the right thing to do. The right thing? I repeated, my voice rising now, the rage simmering under the surface. You thought it was the right thing to give me up, to make me disappear. You erased me from your life as if I didn't matter. My mother stood up then, her expression pleading, but there was nothing she could say to undo the damage. We didn't mean for it to happen like this, she said softly, but I could hear the distance in her words, the rehearsed tone. They had been rehearsing this, hadn't they? Every excuse, every reason to make it all seem okay, but nothing would ever be okay again. I never wanted to come back here, I said, my voice now ice cold. But I had to, because I needed you to see what you did. You didn't just ruin my life. You took away everything I was, everything I could have been. I paused, letting the silence hang between us for a long moment, as if waiting for them to acknowledge the full weight of my words. But they didn't. They just stared, silent, hoping the conversation would end. But it wouldn't. Not until I made sure they understood. I wasn't here to forgive. I wasn't here to heal old wounds. I was here to make them regret their choice, to make them face what they'd done to me, and I wasn't going anywhere until they did. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with tension as the words I had spoken settled into the space between us. My parents didn't speak, didn't even move. I could feel their guilt, pressing against the walls, but there was no remorse in their eyes, no understanding. They were trapped in their own defensiveness, unwilling to admit they had failed me. My father, for the first time in years, looked vulnerable. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by something far more fragile, a man who had built his identity on his success, his image, his family. But the truth I had uncovered, the lies they had woven, were too much for him to hide behind anymore. I didn't ask for this, I said, my voice softer now, though the sting remained. I didn't ask to be abandoned. I didn't ask for you to make a decision without even telling me. I let my words hang there like a challenge, daring them to respond, to defend themselves. But all my father could manage was a deep sigh. Emma, you don't understand, he said quietly, his eyes dropping to the floor. It wasn't easy. Your mother and I, we thought it was for the best. We thought we were doing the right thing. The right thing for who? I shot back, my anger flaring up again. Not for me. You didn't even let me have a say in it. You erased me from your lives and then replaced me with her. I spat the last word, a venomous undertone in it. The her being the woman who had taken my mother's place. The woman who had never been my mother, who had never known me like she had. My mother, now visibly trembling, stepped forward. Her eyes were wet, and her voice, when she spoke, wavered. Emma, I never meant to hurt you. The apology hung heavy in the air, but it felt empty, like words she had said countless times to herself, but never truly meant. No, I shook my head, the bitterness rising in my chest. You didn't just hurt me, you made me believe that I wasn't worthy of love, that I wasn't worth keeping. I was just a mistake you wanted to erase, and you thought I'd never find out. 8. Silence settled between us, one that stretched into an eternity. The weight of the words lingered, heavier than anything I had said before, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. You don't get to erase me, not like that. You don't get to throw me away and expect me to come back as if nothing happened. My eyes hardened as I stepped closer, making sure they felt every ounce of my presence. I've spent years rebuilding myself, putting the pieces back together. You thought I'd forget, thought I'd be grateful for whatever scraps you'd offer. But I'm not that girl anymore. My father looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something like fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but of the reality that maybe, just maybe, he had lost me for good. "Emma," he began, but the words faltered. He was searching for something, anything to say, but nothing came. I stared at him, waiting for something, anything to show that he understood the depth of what had been lost. But there was nothing, no grand apology, no explanation that could fix what had been broken. And with that, I knew. I wasn't here to mend things. I wasn't here to heal the wounds they had created. I was here to show them what they had truly lost, to remind them that the girl they tried to erase wasn't someone they could ever forget. I turned away then, my decision made. It wasn't about going back. It was about making them realize the consequences of what they had done. And as I walked towards the door, I couldn't help but feel a cold, empty satisfaction. I had no intention of returning to the life they had built without me. They had made their bed. Now they would lie in it. The sound of the door closing behind me was oddly final, as though it sealed away all the years I had spent trying to get them to see me, to understand. The air outside was cold, but it felt more like freedom than anything else. I wasn't sure where I was going, but for the first time in ages, I didn't need to know. I had walked out, and nothing felt like it had before. There was no pressure, no expectations, only the quiet hum of my own thoughts filling the space. I walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, not stopping, not looking back. The streets blurred around me, familiar yet unrecognizable. The town I had grown up in, the one I had once thought was my world, now felt suffocating. I had lived in their shadow for so long, trying to fit into the life they had planned for me, a life that had never been mine. And now, it was gone. The streetlights flickered above, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out, as if they were trying to catch me, to pull me back. But I kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the night. Each step was a declaration of independence, a quiet rebellion against everything they had tried to make me. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter I had found, the adoption papers hidden under the carpet in my old room. It felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind, like I had never truly belonged to them. I had always been the outsider, the adopted daughter who never quite fit in. They had given up on me, and I had believed for so long that I was just supposed to be grateful for the scraps they had left me. But I wasn't grateful anymore. No, I wasn't here to reconnect. I wasn't here to fix what had been broken. I was here to make them feel the weight of what they had done. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their acceptance. What I needed now was to reclaim the person I had become during the years they had forgotten me. The woman they had tried to erase, to replace, was standing in front of them now, and she was unrecognizable to them. The anger, the hurt, the feeling of being discarded, it all swirled inside of me. But there was something else now, something more dangerous than resentment. It was a quiet, determined strength. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to shout. I was going to make them regret everything they had done, not with words, but with the reality of who I had become. And as I kept walking through the night, I felt a shift inside of me. The girl they had once known was slipping away, but in her place, something stronger was rising. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew this. I would never be the person they wanted me to be. I would never be the girl they thought they could erase. I was done waiting for them to love me. Now, I was going to make them see what they had lost, and they wouldn't be able to ignore it. The end of this story was just beginning. The sun had barely begun to rise when I found myself standing outside their house once more. It seemed almost surreal, as if the world had slowed down just for me, allowing time to stretch in the quiet of the morning. The house still looked the same, unchanged by the years I had spent away, as though nothing had ever shifted. But everything had. The weight of what I'd learned, of what I had discovered, pressed against me, the walls of the house suddenly seeming too close, too suffocating. I hadn't intended to come back, not like this, but there was something undeniable about the pull, the desire to confront them, to see the look on their faces when they realized the daughter they had forgotten was standing right in front of them. I could feel the sharp sting of betrayal still, lodged in my chest. It was an ache I could no longer ignore, no longer allow to fester in the dark corners of my mind. My hand lingered at the gate. I had spent years wondering what I would say if I ever had the chance. What words would carry the weight of all the hurt they had caused? But in this moment, it wasn't about words anymore. Words were meaningless. They had spoken so many empty ones before, hollow apologies and false promises that never meant a thing. No, this time, I was here to show them the woman I had become. I stepped through the gate and up the path to the door. My feet seemed to move on their own, my body instinctively drawn to the place where it had all started, the place where I had once believed I belonged. The door opened before I even had a chance to knock, and there they were. My parents. So familiar, and yet so distant. They hadn't changed. They still looked the same, older perhaps, but still the same people who had raised me. Or so I had thought. They looked at me with that mix of surprise and confusion, their faces pale as though they couldn't quite believe I was real. "Emma," my father said, his voice thick with a disbelief that mirrored my own. "What are you doing here?" For a moment, I just stared at him, taking in the disbelief in his eyes, the way he seemed almost lost. The same man who had told me I was a burden. The same man who had replaced me without a second thought. He couldn't even fathom why I had come back. "I'm here to talk," I said, my voice steady, unwavering, to finally say the things I've needed to say for years. The words felt like they were rolling off my tongue too easily, as though I had been rehearsing them in my mind for far longer than I cared to admit. But there was something else there, too. A new calmness I had found in the silence I had made for myself. My mother, who had been standing behind him, finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been gone for so long, Emma. We didn't know how to..." "How to what?" I cut her off, my anger bubbling to the surface. How to love me, how to keep me, or how to let me go and pretend like I never mattered. Her eyes flickered with guilt, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for the years of abandonment, the years of being erased. I stepped closer, the space between us closing with each step. They hadn't expected this. I knew that. They had thought they could forget about me, that I would just disappear quietly, that I would simply accept being discarded. But they had underestimated me. "I'm not here for closure," I said, my voice low but full of conviction. "I'm here for the reckoning. You don't get to erase me. You don't get to forget about me. Not now, not ever." There was silence, thick and suffocating. They didn't know what to say. I could see it in their eyes. The shame, the confusion, the guilt that they could no longer hide. And in that moment, I knew I had won. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need anything from them. All I needed was this, the knowledge that they would never forget me again. I turned away, my heart pounding in my chest, but this time it was different. I wasn't running, I wasn't escaping, I was walking away, knowing that I had taken back everything they had once tried to take from me, and I wasn't going to let them off so easily. Not this time. I didn't look back as I walked down the path, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness of the morning. Every step I took away from the house felt like I was shedding another layer of the person I had once been. The naive, hopeful girl who had thought that maybe, just maybe, my parents still cared. Who had returned expecting reconciliation, expecting some sort of understanding, only to be met with the stark reality that they had long since moved on from me. It stung, but the sting wasn't as sharp as it had been before. Time, distance, and the quiet anger that had simmered inside me had given way to something else. A quiet sort of resolve. I had come here looking for answers, but now I knew that the answers didn't matter. Not anymore. The walk through the streets felt almost surreal, as though I were watching myself from a distance. I couldn't shake the image of their faces when I had confronted them, the guilt and confusion in their eyes. But what had it meant? What had they expected me to do? Forgive them. Forget the years of silence, the years of being nothing more than a name on a forgotten document. I didn't want to go back to the house. Not yet. There were too many emotions swirling inside me, too many thoughts I needed to sort through. I needed to find my center again, to reconnect with the woman I had become. And that meant facing the reality of what had been done to me, not just by my parents, but by the system they had created, the lies they had lived, the truths they had buried. As I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, I found myself stopping in front of a small cafe. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries drifted out, and I felt a sudden pull. Maybe it was the need for something familiar, the desire for a moment of calm. I stepped inside, and the bell above the door jingled softly, drawing the attention of the barista behind the counter. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm. "What can I get for you?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what I wanted. A cup of tea? Something stronger, perhaps? But then I caught sight of the newspaper on the counter. The headline read, "Family Secrets Unveiled. The Truth Behind." The disappearances. I paused, my breath catching in my throat. The photograph on the front page was unmistakable. It was my parents. Without thinking, I picked up the paper and sat down at a small table unfolding it. The article detailed the story of several adoptions that had been covered up over the years. It spoke of parents who had relinquished their children to the system, only to later try to erase all traces of those children from their lives. And there, buried in the middle of the article, was a mention of my own family, the very people I had come from. The words blurred as I read, but the message was clear. My parents hadn't just let me go. They had been part of something bigger, a web of lies, of secrets that had extended beyond our family, beyond what I had ever known. The adoption papers were only the beginning. There was more, so much more, that they had hidden from me. The shock hit me like a wave, the weight of it almost too much to bear. They hadn't just erased me, they had been hiding a truth that could shatter everything. And that truth, I realized, was no longer just about me. It was about all of us. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the smell of coffee, trying to steady myself. There was more to this story, so much more. And now I needed to know everything. I needed to unravel the tangled mess they had left behind, piece by piece. And I was going to make them regret every single lie, every secret they thought they could bury. Because now it wasn't just about me. It was about everything they had done to everyone they had ever touched. It was time to tear it all down. I hadn't planned on this. I hadn't planned on discovering the extent of the lies. But now that I had, there was no going back. The cafe was quiet, the hum of the espresso machine in the background barely registering, as my mind raced through the implications of what I had just read. The weight of the adoption papers, the buried secrets, it all came crashing down like a flood I couldn't stop. The truth was like a slow burn, eating away at the remnants of what I had thought was real. I wasn't just the daughter they had abandoned, I was part of something far more complex, a narrative they had tried to control for years. And now, that control was slipping from their hands. I left the cafe with the paper clutched tightly in my hands. Every step felt like I was moving further away from the person I had been before. The naive girl who had thought that if she came back, everything would fall into place. But this wasn't about closure. This was about power. And I was taking it back. As I walked through the streets, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing the message from my mother. "We need to talk. Please come home. It's time to fix this." I stared at the screen, the words taunting me. Fix this? What was there to fix? The years of silence, the hidden papers, the years of pretending I didn't exist? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my mother's message was nothing more than another attempt to placate me, another part of their game. I didn't answer the message. Instead, I turned my attention to the house. My house. The place that had been my home, the place that had been remade, erased, and rebranded into something unrecognizable. The gym they had built where my bedroom once was. It was the final insult. They had literally turned my space into something to erase me from it. I walked up the driveway, the door wide open as though it had been waiting for me. I could feel the tension in the air, the electric hum of anticipation. This wasn't just a return. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was the beginning of the reckoning. Inside, I found them in the living room, looking as I remembered. My father, sitting in his armchair, still with that same air of authority. My mother, standing near the window, her face a mix of guilt and calculation. They knew what was coming. I could see it in their eyes. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady, "and I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to tear it all down." They both stood, startled, as if they hadn't expected me to be so bold. The game had always been theirs to control. But not anymore. I had the power now. "You're not going to get away with this," I said, my words sharp, cutting through the tense silence. "The lies, the secrets, the way you thought you could just erase me, it's over. I know everything." My father opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "No, not another word. You don't get to talk your way out of this." I walked toward the center of the room, standing tall, feeling the weight of everything I had learned, everything I had uncovered, settle into my bones. This was my moment, the moment when I finally took control. They had never imagined I would come back like this, strong, unbroken, determined. But now they would see what happened when someone you tried to erase refused to be silenced. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice low, but filled with certainty. "And you'll regret every single moment you thought you could keep me in the dark." Turning on my heel, I walked out the door, leaving them standing in the house that had never truly been mine. The game was over. The reckoning had begun. And I was finally ready to make them pay for everything they had done.